Whakataka te ahau ki te uru, whakataka te ahau ki tūta, kia mā kene ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi aki ana te tākura, e hio, e huka, e hauhunga. Huye, huye, tāhi.
Thank you for the opening karakia from Simon and Seb. Good afternoon, kia ora te whānau, welcome all. Ko Mandy taku ingoa. Thank you for being here today to celebrate the life of Marshall Allen Seifert. Just a little housekeeping before we begin. Ladies, the powder room is just straight out this door and across the corridor. And men, if you travel down the hall towards the billiard room, I've already mentioned the oldest urinal in the southern hemisphere. Porcelain to behold. It really is. In the unlikely event of an emergency, you can exit through the 3 French doors behind you or back out the door that you came in, and we'll assemble up on the bowling green lawn behind us. This memorial is being recorded and will be available later this evening on YouTube by searching Marshall Seifert. You're invited afterwards to stay for light refreshments and more informal sharing of our memories. Food will be provided just out this door and along the corridor. The bar will be open for purchases and the billiard room too. So spread out, enjoy, and have a look around the club while you're here. My name is Mandy Mayhem, and it's my great privilege to lead you all in the sharing of memories and the telling of Marshall's story. I'm a friend of Marshall's and the family, and a long-time resident of Waitati and a city councillor, here to serve you all. Like Marshall, I believe that I have the gift of the gab, and I'm here at his request. It's my greatest honour to pay tribute to a unique life, and we can all express our love and admiration today for a true character. It's a celebration of a life well lived. Marshall lived life on his own terms. He's lovingly remembered by his whānau, father to Nina and Leah, husband to Annalise, grandfather to Isla and Seb, brother to Sonny, friend, mentor, and inspiration to many. So welcome everyone. As per the family's wishes, a private cremation was held. Thank you everyone who's travelled and made the journey to be here today. Aroha nui, my heart goes out to you all. Let's do our best to paint the colourful tapestry of Marshall's life. My aim is to tell you something you didn't know about this wonderful human being. To begin, I'd like to speak on behalf of Annalise. They were a great team and they had 59 wonderful years together. Marshall was so proud of you, Annalise, and he loved you dearly. Annalise told me the very first time they met, she knew that he was a good person. It was the way his eyes shone when he smiled. She shared 2 of her happiest memories. In Wellington, they went to a play about a house that was being built on the stage. At half-time, a young boy from the group walked out into the audience, scanning the room for volunteers. Immediately, Marshall was chosen. He was just so engaging. All he had to do was smile. And of course, he was in his element for the next 15 minutes on stage, following instructions, impromptu, but in the limelight. Another memory, just down the road from here in Manor Place. Annalise and Marshall had first moved here, barely a fridge in the house, and just enough money to buy a cheap second-hand car. Most days, Marshall would come bouncing home with a flat brown parcel underneath his arm. Another oil painting that enchanted him. He showed his priorities. It was the beginning of him embracing and promoting New Zealand art. In another life, I was a circus ringmaster, and so now I'm going to unleash the ringmaster in me. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome one and all to Marshall Seifert. This is your life. He was kind, he was funny, he was fearless, a raconteur, a lover of creativity and culture, a bon vivant, an enabler, an avid art collector, an entertainer and an impresario. Marshall coined the phrase, "Why, Taddy, why not?" And that's the code we live by. Marshall Seifert, born on the 22nd of May 1939, his father had started a silk mill in the mid-1930s to create parachutes for the war years. He had two siblings, an older brother Miles and a younger sister Sunny. His mother, Elizabeth Parr, known as Betty, was a third-generation Kiwi. Her father, James Parr, was the Mayor of Auckland, the Minister of Education, and the New Zealand High Commissioner in London. In 1945, when Marshall was 6 years old, they moved to New York. Marshall did not like school. He spoke in an Aussie accent. He was small, he felt inferior. He was very smart, however, and he excelled in sports. He would stay up late at night, hiding under the bedclothes with a torch, and listen to the radio and read books. He was gripped by stories of the world. Marshall went to Larchmont and then Foulks Lane High School. His advocacy for the underdog may have come from his school days and his experience. He was a charismatic leader, however, often captain of the sports team. He missed a lot of school, and he was delighted when he actually passed his exams. As a teenager, he would scare his drive-in movie dates by taking his pet rat Ralph for the ride. The rat would inevitably pop up and cause quite a surprise. He attended the University of Vermont to pursue sports while his brother went to Princeton. Marshall was a beatnik from the Lower East Side, an activist during the civil rights movement of the 60s. All of his life, he felt strongly about politics. One of his first jobs was at the Waldorf Astoria in New York making cocktails, and he worked seasonally at the World Fair. Marshall was fortunate enough to be a security assistant in the Ed Sullivan Show when the Beatles came to New York. He would often talk of this. No one had any idea about the screaming girls that would result. It was the Beatles' first television appearance. He went to Europe with his friend Jeff Negan on a wine tour. They stopped in Copenhagen. It was the 22nd of September, a Monday night. He walked into a cafe, and there was Annalise having dinner. There was an instant connection, a serendipitous moment. They went out to a jazz club, and after quite a bit of dancing and a whirlwind 48 hours, they were engaged 3 days later. 3 days. On the Wednesday, he announced that his sister was getting married on the Saturday, and he said, "We should go to the wedding." They booked tickets, and on the Thursday, they were on the plane. They arrived in the middle of the night and took a taxi to stay with Jeff Stokes and his wife. On Friday, Annalise met Marshall's family, and on Saturday was the wedding. The family welcomed her with open arms. They went back to Denmark a few weeks later. At a farewell dinner in New York, Manhattan, Greenwich Village, Lower East Side, he announced, much to Annalise's embarrassment, it was their 3-week anniversary. Annalise Annalise was a medical student, a few years younger than him. Her dad didn't speak English, but when he met Marshall, he took out his gold pocket watch and he gave it to Marshall as a signal of acceptance. When her mother made the announcement of their engagement, people thought Marshall was his army title. Annalise made a decision to start a new life, and for Marshall, this meant New Zealand. They were well matched. Annalise is the sensible one. She always held 3 feet to the ground, being Marshall's anchor. On previous adventures, he'd met a Canterbury shearer in Europe, Neil Manson. They struck up an unlikely friendship and travelled to the UK and Ireland together. Marshall first came to Aotearoa to visit Neil, and he was managing a farm on the Banks Peninsula. As a bonus, he also played cricket. He spent 6 months on the farm on an exchange program in his early 20s. In his words, from an interview I did in 2020 during COVID, Marshall said, "I visited him in 1963 and made the decision if I ever bred, I would come here. I met my wife not long after in her hometown of Copenhagen. We were married in 1967 and we returned to Christchurch until she finished medical school. Annalise got a job at Cherry Farm. We bought a house on Brown Street, Waitati, December 1973. I found work in broadcasting. That lasted about 3 years, and then I gained the position of Recreation Officer at Orokonui Hospital. For many years I was a house husband or stay-at-home dad until my girls started school. I involved myself with the Globe Theatre as a committee member, also acting and directing. This got me started in the concerts. I think I did 6 capping shows, 3 or 4 hospital reviews, and a fundraising event called the Once a Year Day concert, named after the famous song in the Pyjama Game. It proved so popular, it was live broadcast on national radio for 6 years, the cast of which were all from local institutions. A national documentary called The Proper Place in Society covered some of this time and travelled with the musical group. Marshall was a cultural influence in Ōtepoti. He was a member of the Southern Symphonia Board for 12 years, and in 2009 he put together a concert celebrating the life and works of Frances Hodgkins. More about that soon. Marshall was a TV celebrity, working as a softball and basketball commentator for 20 years. He was a towering figure in the Otago basketball community, recently honoured by the Murray McCann Award in 2025 for his outstanding service to basketball. He began as a player on the basketball team when he arrived here, and they won the New Zealand Championships in 1968. Marshall transitioned to coaching in the 1970s. He was a well-known TV and radio commentator for the Rhineck Basketball League in the 80s and 90s, and he won the Mobile Radio Award in 93 for his work in 4ZB. He encouraged many players to move south, study at the university while playing high-level basketball. His strong media presence was cemented by the popular series Antiques for Love or Money in the 1980s. Hosted by Dougal Stevenson, Marshall starred alongside Trevor Plumley, aided by regular guests Cherry Raymond and Richard Valentine. The focus was on the panellists' playful debate around the history and the value of objects. From 91 to 1996, Marshall celebrated emerging New Zealand artists through his self-named gallery on Dowling Street, now the Brett McDowell Gallery. A dealer gallery that showcased artists and hosted many significant exhibitions. He was a passionate collector, deeply committed to supporting the arts and the artists. He gifted many significant objects to the permanent collection of the DPAG, the Dunedin Public Art Gallery. Always generous, he loved to share and inspire people. Ōtepoti Dunedin is so much richer for the contributions that he made in his lifetime. It was at Marshall's suggestion he brought Mr. Shuzo Sashia, head of the Atara Museum, to Dunedin. He spent many weeks in Dunedin curating all the Japanese artefacts in the collections at Overston, the Art Gallery and the Otago Museum. His work, all voluntary, was one of the huge benefits to the organisation. Mr. Sashia was appointed the New Zealand Order of Merit in 2003. Marshall was delighted with these results and the award. There is a long-standing friendship between these men that never waned. Quoted in a National Geographic article, 1989, Waitati, still crazy after all these years. Marshall and Annalise live on 8 acres of native bush on a hill overlooking Blueskin Bay, the perfect place to bring up their daughters, connected to the outdoors and allowed their children to meet all sorts of people and have a broad view. They were close to the arts, the music and the theatre of Dunedin, and Marshall said, "Each of us has seen a lot of the world and we feel very lucky to have discovered a place like Waitati." He says Waitati people are tolerant because there's a lot of open space. The closer people get, the more argumentative they become. Interesting theory. Marshall described his village as a microcosm of logic. He wanted someone to write a book about the place and its people, living our unusual and interesting lives. Described as the cradle of hippiedom, the birthplace of the Values Party and the Mushroom magazine, it attracted alternative lifestylers, creatives and environmentalists. Waitati remains a place of acceptance and idealism. Yes, some of us still wear tie-dyed shirts and eat health foods. Thankfully, not a lot has changed. His fondest Waitati memory, the experience of having New Zealand's preeminent potter Barry Brickell arrive by train to be greeted as if he was royalty. It was coincidentally on his daughter Nina's 40th birthday. A group of the Waitati militia, finely oiled machine, ready to leap into action in a moment's notice, assembled to create a spectacle that impressed Barry so much that he frequently spoke about it. He totally loved it, the songs, the banter, and the general raucousness. So that's my part of the story. I'm now going to invite some people to come up and we'll hear some more about Marshall. Marshall the dad first. I'll ask his daughters Leah and Nina to come and speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. So I'm Leah, but most of you probably know us, Leah and Nina. I'm going to start by sharing a couple of family tributes before Nina and I go on to sharing our words. So it's quite hard for me, but I'm going to get through it. A ceremony was held for Dad in Larchmont, New York, at St. John's Church, where he went to Sunday school. Members of our American family attended. Dad's sister Sunny and her 3 daughters all live in Larchmont with their families. I'm going to share a couple of tributes from the family. This one is from my cousin Caroline and her husband Jose. We have so many fond memories of Marshall from our time in New Zealand. The garden, sharing meals, playing cards late into the night, his visits to New York, all of it marked by his special wit, genuine curiosity and his sheer, good-natured presence. There never seemed to be a lack of words, some excellent story, a unique memory, a wry smile conveying so much insight and mirth that was never boastful, but came from wanting others to be included in on the scoop. We love spending time with Marshall. He was and continues to be, in some other dimension, I am convinced, one of the most unique, interesting human beings I've ever had the privilege of knowing. We will miss him deeply. And this is a eulogy from Dad's sister Sunny, written with love. By the time Marshall was 6 years old, he had already crossed the Pacific on a Navy transport ship, landed in San Francisco and rode trains across the American continent, ending up in Larchmont, New York, to our grandmother. To the beginning of everything we knew as home. 6 years old. Most of us at 6 were just trying to find our shoes. that restlessness, a willingness to move towards something, even when the destination was uncertain, would become the signature of his life. He was the middle child, which anyone who has been a middle child will tell you is its own kind of formation. You learn to find your own lane. Marshall found his on a basketball court or on a softball pitch, and eventually on the other side of the world. He wasn't much for classrooms, although he was extremely bright. In New York, he worked at the World's Fairs. He painted houses, was a page at CBS, and he worked on the Ed Sullivan Show. He had many jobs. He travelled through America, then Europe, and moved through the world the same way some people read books, hungrily without a fixed itinerary. And then in the way that life occasionally offers a moment that changes everything, he found himself in Denmark. Met Annalise, got engaged within 3 days, travelled to New York for my wedding, and then shortly after his own wedding. Then left for New Zealand. And New Zealand, as it turns out, kept him. He built his life there. He became, in the fullest sense, a man of two worlds. And that is where grief lives for those of us who loved him here. Not only losing them now, but in the years of distance, the ordinary Tuesday afternoons we didn't share, the phone calls that crossed too many time zones, the accumulation of small moments that make up a life together. He was present for the sacred ones, our father's death, our mother's final days, and some of the weddings. There is a particular sorrow in loving someone across distance. You grieve in instalments. A little each time the visit ends, a little each year the miles stay the same. And then one day the grief arrives all at once and you realise you were always carrying it. And I believe death is not an ending, not a time to say goodbye at the grave, it's a time to say well done, to say until. Those who have gone before us are not absent but ahead. I believe that Marshall has met. I believe that her mother has found him. I believe that the boy who crossed the Pacific when he was 6 years old, who stammered because others mocked his Australian accent, who never quite fit the mould but kept moving anyway. That boy is known completely now as loved without remainder. We light a candle for you, Marshall. We offer you the mercy that has always held you, even when the ocean was full of yours. And we give thanks for your laugh, for your stubbornness, for the fact that you could meet a woman on a Monday and know by Wednesday that everything had changed. For the life that you built so far away that was nonetheless yours. Go well, dear brother, go well. I've got to share my words now. I really want to start by thanking everyone for being here, especially, as Mandy said, those who have travelled across the country to send Dad on his final journey, and to offer to support to Mum, Nina and I. To Mum and Nina, but thank you for looking after Dad at home in Waiteri until you just couldn't anymore. I know it was hard, but I know you wouldn't have done it any other way. Throughout our childhood, I remember Dad laughing a lot. We had a lot of fun. He loved telling jokes and always had short, direct pieces of invaluable advice. But he would also come home tired, and having now read through all the beautiful tributes, the dozens of newspaper articles, and all the recent messages, I think I finally understand why. Because he gave so much of his energy to so many people whenever he could. He wasn't just an ideas man and enthusiast, he was a kind, generous man. Dad didn't use a cell phone or have an email address, but after he retired and proudly became a self-titled landscape gardener, we finally managed to force a bulletproof, straightforward Nokia brick phone onto him, purely for safety. He loved to head into the native bush on the section, where he would spend hours keeping a public track tidy. Closer to the house, I watched him once, fall backwards down a garden bank. Instead of getting upset, he just lay there on his back with his legs sticking straight up in the air, laughing his head off. On one of my visits to Waiteri, I asked how the phone was going because he never answered my calls. He looked at me with delight and said, "Oh, it's going great. My pocket watch has stopped working now, and so now I've got something to keep track of the time." He stubbornly continued to live a life entirely untethered from technology, apart from a short stint with online TAV. He didn't even know the right terminology and would refer to the computer mouse as the damn rat. Dad was fascinated by Japanese culture and collected Japanese pottery. He was moved by the Japanese proverb, fall down 7 times, get up 8. To him, Japan's history was proof that you can take the heaviest blows, endure the fire, and emerge stronger. Dad loved to see how many more native birds there were in Waiteri and around the house, and he loved to feel the morning sun on his skin. When I asked him if he thought the deck needed to be painted, He referred to wabi sabi and we moved on. Next to the house, looking out to Blueskin Bay, there is a large old Japanese maple tree. The tree slowly began to die when Dad started to show signs of dementia. When he lay in Ross home for his final 3 weeks, directly outside the window was a beautiful, vibrant Japanese maple tree. Thank you, Dad.
I also want to thank you all for coming here today. Mr. Marshall Seifert, who is also Mr. New York. My dad, Marshall Seifert. I always considered myself the hillbilly and Dad was Mr. New York. I was at home in Waitani with sheep that would get out, and at the odd different time I'd rang up Dad and he'd come out in his pajamas and I'd say, pick up a stick, and he'd walk behind and round them up. I arrived in the Seifert family as an adopted 2-year-old baby. Mum and Dad were up in Auckland, and when they got the call down in Dunedin that the infant was ready, Mum flew down straight away and Dad drove the car back with the corgi dog a short time later. Sebastian, some of you might remember him. My earliest memory of Dad was dancing around the living room with him to his great record selection of blues, jazz and classical. Nina Simone was a favourite, and that's who I'm named after. We had a great childhood growing up in Waitani. We rode our bikes, drove to the beach without seat belts, and the old Hillman Hunter. After school, we would sometimes be dropped off at the basketball stadium in town, where Dad would buy us an ice cream and we would sit and watch the game, Dad fiercely shouting at his team. In 1983, we moved up on Doctors Point Road to a bigger house and 6 acres of land, mostly native bush. I was horse mad and got a pony. We had a couple of sheep and Leah got a pet rabbit called Bungie. So here on our lifestyle block, our little piece of paradise, Mr. New York was suddenly having to deal with the local pests. Possums on the roof, wild rabbits on the lawn, and rats in the undergrowth. So Dad got himself a slug gun. And despite hating everything there is about war, he would take shots outside the living room window. Sometimes at night, the possum would be screeching outside Mum and Dad's bedroom. So I'd go and get the dog and trap it at the bottom of the tree. Dad would shoot at it while I held the torch. It turns out Mr. New York was a pretty good shot. He killed quite a few of those noisy buggers. We think Dad's favourite sport was basketball, but near the end of his life it was baseball, and his memories were growing stronger about growing up in America. We got a basketball hoop and we put it up on the shed, and Leah, Dad and I would play. It was fun but competitive. Dad was always praising our good shots, but when it was his turn to shoot, he would add gusto, saying, "Read 'em and weep, kids." Eventually, Dad would retire from the game and go back inside. And then things would get a little bit heated between us girls. And Dad would yell, "Knock it off, kids." The game would end when we got sick of going down into the bush to retrieve the basketball. Dad was a couch potato. He loved sport. Any sport, you name it, he watched it. It was his way of relaxing. He used to get pretty fired up when his team was getting fouled. His excitement on the game was greatly enhanced as he usually had a bet on both sides. I will always remember Dad at home in the quiet little seaside village of Blueskin Bay. Mr. New York's favourite saying was, "Life is like a bowl of cherries. Why tatty, why not?"
Thank you so much, Leah and Nina. I'd forgotten about Sebastian the dog. Next up, it's time to hear from Dave Norris. Welcome, Dave. Thank you. Can everybody hear all right over here? You can hear? No?
You set the bar very high, as have the last two speakers. So I started out thinking about doing this a couple of weeks ago, and started making some serious notes, and was going to craft it into into a well-written speech. But I cast those aside, and I'm going to talk more from the heart and focus my attention particularly on the basketball, early days of Marshall and basketball. It's just so great to see so many of you here. A lot of you are a little aged from when we last ran up the court, and but it's nice to see that you're all still doing those. So can I just have a show of hands, perhaps, of all of the people who had a connection with Marshall through basketball? And you will see there's a few of us here, and it was a bond that really tied things together, and particularly in the early days, was a big part of setting the standard for basketball coaching, basketball behaviour, all sorts of things that I don't think would exist today if Marshall hadn't been a big part of it. I wonder who selected the photographs on the little program today, because you've done a fantastic job. I mean, each one of those is the one on the back page reminds me of some of the photos that Donald Trump's been producing recently with the shining halo. And then there's the one of the cigar, and I'll tell you a basketball story about that. A number of years ago, and I was talking, I guess, probably early 70s, the Basketball Association sponsored a fantastic tour featuring a fellow called Reed Auerbach, and who at the time was the coach of the famous Boston Celtics. Reed won something like 9 NBA championships in a row, and was a real character. He was Italian by nature, and he behaved in a way. And along with Reed, he brought a fellow called John Havlicek, who was one of the real NBA stars. John was sort of 6'7", which seemed big by those standards those days, but he's a guy who could dribble, he could shoot, he could box out. I remember that we played a exhibition game in Christchurch, and Marshall gave me the job of marking John. And I raced up very keenly to box him out from a rebound, only to be hit so hard that I ended up on my ass on the other side of the free throw line. He was a big man for those days. But the great thing, the real characteristic that Reed Auerbach had was that when he felt that he was over the line and he was going to win, he would light up a 9-inch cigar, and he would smoke that. And Marshall, after that tour, Marshall adopted this thing. So it was very unusual to see a New Zealand basketball coach walking around with a dry cigar. But he was a fantastic man, and somebody who I think Marshall had revered for many, many years. He was an amazing man. I sometimes know whether I use the word super intelligent, but he was a man who understood all the principles of what he was talking about, what he was involved in, and he would put all those pieces together, and he'd cut through the chase, cut through to, no crap. It was he do and get done what he needed to do. And in doing so, he became an amazing influencer, I guess you'd call it in today's, for many particularly young men, but people of all walks of life. And later on, you'll hear a fantastic tribute written by John or Dutchy Rademakers, as we knew him, who'd be one of the most gifted basketballers that New Zealand has ever seen. He was also Canterbury golf champion. He was also New Zealand billiards champion. Dead-Eye Dick would be a simple description. But Dutchy became influenced by Marshall, and I think Simon's going to read the tribute that Dutchy has written. So he came to New Zealand in, I think, 1968, we first saw him, and Dave Sharp, who's here today, purloined him to come and play for King's High School Old Boys, together with, if any of you remember, Lance Pearson, either of them hated giving up the ball. Marshall would race around in his little skinny white legs, well, give me the ball, give me the ball, give me the ball. And then he'd shoot some outlandish shot from way downtown. And meanwhile, Lance, who used to play in the engine room under the basket, would always get a bit pissed off with Marshall. Anyway, he played, and eventually we seduced him to come and be the coach for the Otago University team, and that was when he was really in his element. He took a group of ragtag players and turned us into a top team. We won the New Zealand University Championship. We won the New Zealand Club Championships. He was lucky. He had John McDonald on his side, and many of you know the skills that John had. Dutchy Rademakers, Warwick Mayo, and a number of other very very talented players. Joe Dunstan and Andy Bennett all went on to play for New Zealand. But each one of those people, although he was the coach, he influenced each of those people in his own special way. And I always take my hat off to him when he took on the role as being a recreation officer out at Orokonui, because I'd done the job when I was at phys school, in school holidays, and it was a pretty hard job, but not Marshall. He went in, and his first thing he said, we're going to put on a concert with these guys. And these were older, very sick men who'd been institutionalized most of their lives. And he produced most amazing concerts. And he did it 3 or 4 years in a row, and received all sorts of accolades for doing that. And it just showed that he was one of those people that had a good idea. He knew how to make it work, got the right people around him, and produced them. Interesting today, we've got 2 speakers who are coming up, and believe it or not, they're gentlemen who played the parts of Jesus and Herod in one of the Captain concerts. Marshall had the audacity to take on producing Hair and Jesus Christ Superstar at the Regent Theatre, and yes, and Ian Taylor was Herod, and Graham Wardrop, who's going to play for us later, was Jesus. So you were lucky to be in such a scheme. The only thing I don't know is, Ian, whether or not Shane Jones knows that you once had a life as Herod. I'd like to share just a moment with you that some of you may be aware of, some have not. And I've sought Annalise's permission to do this. In June of 1973, Marshall and Annalise were living at Cherry Farm, and we used to enjoy the odd night out. And on this particular night, we had a pretty raucous night, and goodness knows what elements we'd consumed. But the snow came down, and Marshall and Annalise could not get back over the motorway. So Ian and Neil and Jan Pascoe, who we'd played with at the time, gave up their bed. Annalise was 9 months pregnant. And so they knew they were taking a risk. And anyway, 2 a.m. in the morning, Marshall comes out, need some water, need some towels.
Boil the kettle, boil the hot water.
And Annalise said, actually all we need is a car.
I had to shout, start to get the car started. Hurry up. And
Orders,
barking But I was in labour. I knew I was.
And so 9 months pregnant, she was in labour, her waters had broken, and we had to get her to the hospital. So we got the car and we drove off down to Cumberland Street somewhere to Women's Hospital and delivered Annalise, and then sort of then waited. Unfortunately, the baby that Annalise was carrying was stillborn. He'd grown to full term, the little boy. And in those days, if that had happened, hospital protocol didn't allow you to share time with the baby. And if it wasn't for a really special Fijian nurse who wrapped the baby and brought it to Annalise to share. On the baby's birth certificate was the name Murura. It happened to be the same day as the French exploded a nuclear bomb on Murura atoll. And Marshall was adamant that it was a sign. This wasn't meant to be. Nonetheless, 2 months later, they adopted Nina. We arrived in September of that year. And then, believe it or not, 10 months later, little Leah was born as well. So, out of what could have been a major tragedy, transpired into a lovely family. I had, had a few other things that I was going to mention, but Annalise, I think we all regarded you as the matriarch in the family, and I was lucky enough to, and have been lucky enough to spend many of those years as Uncle Dave, my wife, Auntie Anne, to replace the aunts and uncles that live offshore. And it's been an absolute privilege to be part of this family. We did all sorts of things that perhaps Marshall wouldn't have done. We skied, we tramped. We finally got Marshall to Stewart Island for a whole 4 days in an old dung-out caravan. Jesus, he was terrible. Absolutely shocking country. But nevertheless, it was a good experience. At Leah's wedding, how many years ago, Leah?
10.
10 years ago, at Simon and Leah's vineyard, we had a lovely celebration. Marshall had set himself on delivering one of his grandiose speeches, which is always full of mixed metaphors and somewhat convoluted thinking, but we got the drift. Annalise was to follow him, and she stood up and said to him, Marshall, I've never tried to change you, but I have never given up. I expect an improvement. And it probably sums up the man. It was a great loss to us all, and it was wonderful that 2 years ago the basketball boys and girls had a fantastic reunion, recognising Marshall's input to basketball. Leah pulled all that together. It ended up in him being awarded As Mandy said before, the Murray McMahon trophy for contribution to basketball, and he certainly did that. But he did it alongside all of these other things: involvement in the arts, involvement in music, involvement in theatre, and he certainly is a great loss. So thank you for your time. I hope we've taken a few memories for you, and once again, well done on the pictures. All the best.
Muchly, Mr. Norris. I'm going to invite John Saylor up now. He was the editor and producer of Martial Law, Volume 1. Please, Mr. Saylor, the podium is yours.
Yeah, that's okay.
Sorry.
Hello, everybody. What a wonderful sight, the sun, the Dunedin sun pouring in. Yeah, martial and basketball. A great combination, and a lucky one for New Zealand. Martial's contribution to New Zealand basketball was more than simply significant. It ran deep and it ran wide. In a game of giants, he too had a giant presence. Whether you were inside or outside the game in the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, it was impossible not to feel the Martial effect. As a player, he won a national title with Otago, as has been mentioned. As a coach, he built the University of Otago men's team into what was one of the top club sides in the country. A national club championship eluded Martial, as far as I know, Dave, as a coach, but he came oh so close in 1971. Whoops! I was saw that game, and Otago U lost that year to the Marist side, the Wellington side, Marist, in Wellington. Marist won ugly. Otago lost beautifully and tragically. Fun fact from that game, Marist's home crowd seemed to be cheering for Otago almost all the way through the game. Martial also coached New Zealand junior men's team, which is how I got to know him as a coach. For 3 straight years, 72 to 75. The team had a winning record over that time. This tells you something of Martial's impact as national junior coach. The year after he finished coaching that team, 2 of the players he brought through, both still teenagers, were starting for the Tall Blacks. As a member of those teams, I can honestly say I loved playing for Martial. So did all of us. I cannot think of a better man, a man who had such a great understanding of young men to be in that position. Martial coached an up-tempo, high-energy, press and run style of game. He said he felt that style most suited the Kiwi scrapper mentality. But I think it was also a reflection of his own personality, the way he wanted to live. Open, risk-taking, a little anarchic, refusing to ever be seen as boring. His coaching methods could be unconventional. You learn to expect the unexpected at practice. There was a famous episode at a national junior camp in Nelson when he brought out boxing gloves to practice. The theory was that if we sparred with each other, it would help our defensive footwork in basketball. In the 3rd bout, a young bruiser from Southland landed a punch on his opponent's chin. The boy just fell flat and lay there. He was knocked out. His face went white. So did Martial's. I think it was the only time I ever saw Martial absolutely clean bowled, not knowing what the hell to do. To everyone's relief, the kid came round, seemed none the worse for the experience. Marshall called off the practice, collected the gloves, and we never saw them again. Words were perhaps Marshall's chief currency. He was a storyteller. There were stories about his experiences, long narrative jokes with shocking, often earthy endings, always well told. He was playful with words, a little theatrical. I remember one afternoon in Nelson with that junior team, he told us we were visiting a friend of his who was a jeweler. The jeweler was a small man and he had a small shop. One after the other we filed in. 6'8", 6'7", 6'5", and stood there in front of this guy. Then Marshall, grinning, went forward and thumped the counter. Food and wine for my men. We are hungry and have travelled far. Hundreds of thousands of Marshall's words were broadcast to the nation. Marshall and Bob Montai, TVNZ's commentary team in the 80s, became New Zealand's first voices of basketball. Marshall was always colourful, catchy, lively. We all had our favourite Marshall commentary lines. Here's one of mine. They've got Saints going back faster than Ian Fraser's hairline. In the commentary box, Marshall did more than analyse the play and entertain. He saw himself as a kind of basketball missionary, explaining and selling the game to New Zealanders, trying to convince them there was more to winter sports than rugby and soccer. He did the same in other media. At a time when Kiwis were more media shy and not prone to sounding off, Marshall thought nothing of ringing a newspaper or radio station and telling them he was the national junior coach, and boy did he have a story for them. He knew what good copy was. You can trace a line now between basketball today, the fact that it's now a bigger sport in secondary school than rugby, and the spade work done by Marshall decades ago. He knew it would happen. We just had to keep at it, spreading the word, demanding more space for the sport. The growth would come. As has been mentioned, Marshall 2 years ago received the Murray McMahon Award for Basketball New Zealand in recognition of his outstanding contribution to the men's game in this country. And I can tell you it was a very, very popular call. I think Marshall saw basketball the way he saw art, as one of life's gifts, a beautiful thing created by people to challenge people, something that makes life bigger and richer, that brings us together and helps us find out more about who we are. The basketball get-together held a couple of years ago, as Dave mentioned, in Marshall's honour, in this very room, was, looking back, so perfect in every way. He was here and former players came from all over New Zealand, some from overseas. It was a time when the words didn't come from him for a change, but from all of us. There was a wonderful outpouring of stories. More importantly, there was a wonderful outpouring of aroha and thanks. For all of us, the passing years have made it clearer how much he gave to us and what he meant to us. He taught us the game, making it interesting and fun, but he also taught us life lessons. Everything from advice about wine, which I've taken on board, to the importance of calling out moral injustice wherever it was. Now I know I speak for all of basketball when I say to Annalise and the girls and the whole whānau, we send our aroha, we embrace you, we're grieving with you. He was a great man, and thank you very much, family.
Thank you so much, Mr. Seifert. And now I'd like to invite Sir Ian Taylor to talk. He's going to share some memories of university and of those famous capping shows.
I have a confession to make. I'm meant to be at a 50th birthday party in Queenstown, and I have to leave very shortly to get to it, but I had absolutely no hesitation in delaying that to be here to honour Marshall Clark. There is a Māori whakatauki, ko ngā tahua o tapawai I nāhi, he toira o ramo a pōpō. And translated, I always like to say for a Guy and Espina fans, you already know what that means. For Mike Hosking fans, I have a translation. The footsteps we lay down in our past create the paving stones for where we stand today. And in that Māori worldview, those footsteps are always in front of us. So I look out and see those footsteps all of the time. And the really cool thing about that whakatauki is they don't apply only to your footsteps, they apply to footsteps of others. And as I look out there, the footsteps that I shared with Marshall came into focus as I thought about what I would talk about today. I haven't written anything, but I just sat down back there because I'm 76 now and the memory is a bit foggy, but I do remember the Capping concerts, so I'll just tell a few stories about the Capping concerts. And I wasn't quite sure how they all came about, so I just went to ChatGPT. And here's what it told me. In the early 1970s, Marshall Seifert transformed the Otago Capping concerts into what has been described as its most artistically ambitious era. He brought rock theatre to Dunedin audience with productions such as Feet, his parody of Hair. Now, this is typical, isn't this typical Marshall? He's going to put on Hair. Imagine the copyright. He didn't even care about that, but I better not call it Hair, so let's call it Feet. Along with versions of Jesus Christ Superstar. Now this was really interesting as well, because he calls, we're going to do Jesus Christ Superstar, but his idea is, but we will start it with a Rolling Stones song from Sympathy to the Devil. So he's taken two of them, Sympathy for the Devil and Jesus Christ Superstar, and put them together, and then asked me to be both the devil and Heron, along with Graham Wardrop. You know, it was an incredible time. He brought together some of the most amazing musicians around Dunedin to do this, and it is, a lot of people probably don't know, but we performed, those concerts were performed in His Majesty's Theatre, Mayfair Theatre, and then they got so big we had to perform them in the Regent Theatre. And for 5 nights, the Regent Theatre was sold out for a Capping concert. Wow. And the Jesus Christ Superstar Capping concert travelled to Invercargill. That wasn't enough. We then hired a plane and flew to Auckland and delivered Jesus Christ Superstar in Auckland. And that would surprise nobody if you knew Marshall. And only Marshall would pull that sort of stuff off. So, you know, that was incredible. Those are the days of John Gadsby, McPhail Gadsby. So he changed the whole face of that by just thinking boldly, thinking differently. I didn't really know all that much, so it's been really great hearing some of the stories about Marshall today, and didn't have much to do with him afterwards. A little bit, he had the art gallery across the road, and I'll come to that in a second. But I just want to tell a story, and there will be people here who know this is the Marshall we all knew. So we would have these rehearsals, and I remember this one particularly in the Regent Theatre, because he's sitting up up there looking down on the stage. On the stage is full of all these students auditioning to be in the chorus of Jesus Christ Superstar. And the music's playing, the great Tim Hazelden sucking away on his piano. Marshall stands up and goes, "Stop!" Everyone stops. He looks down on the stage and says, "Hey, you, the fat one in the middle, move. I can't see the girl behind you." Marshall. Which leads me to another story about Marshall. So now he's got the art gallery. So one day he drags me over there because he wants to sell me some art that's going to be really, really valuable one day by an artist called Ivan Hill. So I have this piece of art, and this is Marshall as well. Marshall knew of my Māori heritage, so he thought I'd be really interested in that. Maybe this was for me. It is a self-portrait of Ivan Hill as a Māori chieftain with mokos, self-portrait with mokos and a korowai on, standing in this thing. Now, I looked at this and thought, I know a lot of people who might find this quite offensive. But Marshall thought it was a really great idea, and it was one that I should have. I took it, probably to get it off the wall quite fast, but I took it home, and it sits in pride place at home, because I look at that and think, you know, it certainly was no Goldie, but I look at it and I think that was really the Marshall I knew. Now, Marshall, it came from the heart. This would be something that his Māori mate would like. A Pākehā, painting himself as a Māori warrior with a korowai, and it hangs in pride of place on my wall. Because every time I look at it, it doesn't have the value of a Goldie, but it has enormous value to me because it reminds me of that amazing man. Thank you.
And now it's time to hear one of those songs as I invite up Graham Waldrop now. Thank you, Graham. I was just reminded of a little story, and that was at another funeral we attended, Jakob Fenstra, a local artist, and Marshall stood up to speak at the funeral, and all he wanted to do was hold up a painting that Jakob had painted, and he said, "It's Michael Jackson." He was besotted. He thought it was incredible Jakob had painted a picture of Michael Jackson. If you know, you know. Thank you, Graham. The floor is yours.
Well, not everyone can say, "When I was Jesus." What wonderful memories. I don't want to say too much. I'm going to play a piece of music. But Marshall was a special person, and he inspired me. The year after we did Superstar, we wrote a show that was based on Colin McCann's Gate 3 painting, I Am. And it went from creation to enlightenment. And Marshall, we had meetings at Marshall and Annalisa's, and we'd talk about these shows, and Marshall would say, "Graham, I want you to write a song about an orphan girl." And I'd go and do it. I mean, he brought stuff out in me that was sort of very early Luther days, and I then felt confident to write songs, and we did our recordings, and I'm still writing songs, and okay, I'm going to play, this is an instrumental piece. The previous mayor of Christchurch asked me if I would play a piece, an instrumental piece, in a ceremony for the families of the earthquake victims. And she said that the ceremony was to be called Love Lives On. And I thought, what a beautiful title for a piece of music. And I would like to play Love Lives On for Marshall today. I'm all nervous.
Wow, that was pretty special. We have got a whole concert program lined up for you today. Next up, I'd like to invite Mr. John Gow to come up and speak a little bit about Marshall's art world. Thank you, John.
That was really beautiful, Graham, thank you. Marshall. I remember getting the call from Leah saying that Marshall was unwell. And I thought to myself, I don't want to be the guy that comes and stands here to farewell, and so when time allowed, I leapt on a plane and came to the hospital. And as it turned out, it was complete serendipity, because at the hospital was Wayne. So Wayne and I spent a day entertaining Marshall. And it was such a special day. He wasn't well. At one stage, I can remember saying to him, Marshall, look, I can see 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle rattling around in your head and it's just not coming together. Don't worry about it. Trying to say what you're saying. And he'd smile. When I went to see him the next morning, he was asleep. He woke up, and you know what the last thing he said to me was? I was walking out the door, and he just shouted at me, "Basketball!" I said, for God's sake, is that the last thing you're going to say to me? And he just smiled. So, I mean, I was a wee whippersnapper in the art world when Marshall walked into our family gallery in Albert Street, something like 42 years ago. And we had a Rudy Gopaz show on. And you know, when Marshall walked into a room, the room felt his energy. And I kind of looked at this guy and thought, this is the same accent I hear on the radio, commentator, is this the same guy? And of course it was. And I thought, wow, so you can mix sport and art, it's okay. Because I was a great fan of all sorts of sports, mostly rugby, Marshall's disappointment. But here was a guy who was in the art world, who embraced sport. The first thing he did was he taught me how to do business, his way. Now, John, I collect self-portraits. I'm going to buy that self-portrait of Rudy Gopaz. And over here, I've got these Jeffrey Harris works. They're fantastic. They're just amazing works. 1969, 1970, first works he's ever done. He said, so I'm going to give you 3 of those, and I'm going to take that portrait. Okay. Let's set the parameters, you know, for our enduring friendship and the way we did business. Marshall was very generous with his knowledge. In fact, if I stuff up this speech today, I'm going to totally blame him, because when I was very young, I had to give a talk, and I was pretty nervous about it. And I was talking to Marshall on the phone. He goes, okay, I'll give you some tips. So firstly, learn your subject. Know what you're going to say. Write down bullet points. Don't read it. Just don't bloody read it. Christ. And then he said, be confident. He said, nobody wants to sit in the audience and watch you make a dick of yourself. And you know, Gary, and then he said, the most important thing, he said, get nervous beforehand. Don't get nervous when you're on the stand. And I went, okay. So if I don't get nervous before a speech, I get really worried. They were great pointers, and I've carried them through my life, and I've done a reasonable amount of public speaking, and as a result, you know, not many of them have gone bad. But this guy, he married the most beautiful bride, arrived in New Zealand, went to Wellington, and I dare say, Annalise, you were having trouble buying pots and pans. Turns up at Peter McLeavy's gallery and buys this. You know, Annalise was obviously part of this, but buys this incredible painting by Colin McCann. This Day a Man Is was its title, 1970. This is a writing painting that people today still can't quite get their heads around. And somehow Marshall knew it was good. And I think, you know, obviously with Annalise's support, he wanted to learn about this painting somehow, learn why it was good. Peter McLeavey was the greatest art dealer New Zealand had, and this was one of the great paintings that Peter McLeavey sold. It's now in a museum in Australia, and you know, I think that painting went a long way towards making Waitati happen. He also bought, at a similar time, another great McCann painting, which was a Koru from 1962. I mean, these were tough things to buy in their day, but Marshall had an eye, and he backed himself. And I think, you know, this is one of the great things that Marshall has done, obviously right through his life. He's backed himself, but by backing yourself, you're also backing other people. He taught me so much. It was like my, sorry. He was like my second dad. So when it came to learning about wine, he taught me everything he knew. We used to have these amazing meals because he wanted to teach me about food. And the etiquette. I mean, Marshall's etiquette was just something else to watch. You know, we'd be at the Flash's restaurant in Auckland. It's called the Top of the Town back there. It's a fantastic room. They did great degustation meals. Marshall would order the wine. And a poor sommelier would come up, pour one. Nah, it's no good. Really? He would stand by him back, he would send food back. He'd be having breakfast. Yeah, I want some cream. That's not cream, that's milk. I want cream. There's the cream, so. You know, the top of the bottle cream. It doesn't come in the bottle anymore. We would go to lunch at the Northern Club. I became a member. And those lunches were just so memorable. I was telling Annalise that, you know, we'd be sitting there, you know, we'd start with champagne and bluff oysters, and then there'd be a Chablis with your entree, and then a Burgundy or a beautiful Pinot Noir. You're so proud with you, Simon, getting all these awards for your wine. A beautiful Pinot Noir. And then we'd finish on cigars and cognac. By which stage, it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and my staff would be going, "Where the hell's John?" Oh, he's at lunch with Marshall, he doesn't come back. I mean, the lunches were so good and the conversation was so intense and interesting and amusing and funny. Like, at times I can remember, I just really don't want to break this by going to the toilet, you know. And in the end, you'd have to run to the toilet. So, and you think, God, this is just one of the great lunches. I mean, Marshall's founded his gallery in Dunedin. You know, not many people do that. It's quite difficult. By finding a collection of Burton Brothers photographs and selling them to our National Gallery. That was the beginning of the Marshall Seifert Gallery in Dunedin. So Alfred and Walter Burton, who set up their business in Dunedin in 1868, were the sort of the backbone the business was built on. But of course from there, you know, Ralph Holteri became a family friend, Geoffrey Harris, a family friend and a man that Marshall championed constantly, always. Ivan Hill's been mentioned, and Wayne Syde is here. Wayne may not tell you, but I will, in that Leah took a lovely photo of myself, Wayne and Marshall in the middle when Marshall was in bed at hospital. Wayne painted this amazing painting of the three of us, which we sent to Annalise. And what a great memory of that day, Wayne. So thank you. So the phone calls, you know, when we were in our heyday of being art dealers, Marshall would call. Yeah, it's me. It's a McCann. Yeah, okay, Marshall. What McCann? No, you've got to come down. So I'd get on a plane and come down, you know. And sure enough, there'd be a McCann either in someone's collection or in the gallery. And And this happened on a regular basis. So I was in and out of Dunedin. I stayed at Waititi. You slept under a beautiful Toss Williston painting. You walked past a wonderful Ralph Titty. You looked at the big Jeffrey Harris on the wall and think, jeepers, that's still a tough painting. But it was so special. I watched Leah and Nina grow up, telling Nina not to ride motorbikes. Celebrating sporting achievements by Leah. And then, you know, now we're all much older. In fact, it's a strange thing. And when you're 23 and in the art business and Marshall walks in, 23 years, 24 years older than me, he's so much older. But now I'm standing here thinking, actually, there wasn't that big an age difference. Because once you hit 65, anyone older seems young. I mean, I can remember on one occasion when we were at the top of the town having dinner, and we had to go down to his room for something, probably to get a cigar, I'd imagine. And we were standing at the lifts. And Marshall says, I got $100 that this lift's going to arrive before you, the one you're standing in front of. I could hear my lift. I said, yeah, you're on. Didn't realise he could hear his. Mine arrived about a second before his, and he never forgave me. Hate losing. But he was a bit like an onion, Marshall. You know, you had to peel off the layers. I mean, I was astonished when I found out that his grandfather was the mayor of Auckland, for example. You know, Sir James Parr, that he directed theatre concerts, that he was, you know, what I knew about the softball and the basketball, everybody knew about that. He loved going to Ataru, which was the sister city for Dunedin, and promoting Dunedin, and he loved the Japanese way of life. Those were some of the great times for Marshall's travel. Marshall's dictum to me was, he said, I love living in Dunedin, but I've got to know I've got a ticket somewhere. So he was always going somewhere. He was always on the move. One of those trips was, we met in London. We both just happened to be in London at the same time. And you know, this was probably the late 80s. And I went to Sotheby's, and my father's favourite artist was a painter who painted with Francis Hodgkins called Ivan Hitchens. And I went along and looked at Sotheby's. There was an Ivan Hitchens there, and it wasn't outrageously expensive. Anyway, Marshall meets me the next day. We have lunch, we go to the auction, and I'd got a paddle he didn't know, and I start bidding. And I buy this painting. He's just standing there looking at me. Did you just buy that? I said, I did, yeah. What the hell? Anyway, after I paid for it, and you know, got this painting under my wing with a bit of bubble wrap around it, I said, right, lunch. We've got to have lunch. We've got to celebrate this. It must have been a morning auction, because it was definitely lunchtime. And only Marshall, we're walking around Berkeley Square, you know, which is a posh part of London, and he sees a club. He goes, right, we'll go there. I went, oh, but we're not members, Marshall. That doesn't matter. I said, I've got this painting. Yeah. You know, he bangs on the door opens, or some, you know, there's a page in the top hat. And Marshall just talks his way through the door. The guy said, oh, all right, come and have lunch. And there we are, sitting out in this table, overlooking Berkeley Square. Ivan Hitchens is on the coat rack downstairs. I'm thinking, I hope it's okay. And we had another unbelievably memorable night. So I can't remember the number of times I dialed 03775 call Marshall and tell him about something. Marshall's timing was always impeccable. He would turn up at most of the important occasions. You know, in 1987, he was at the opening of Gowlangsford Gallery and just wanders in unannounced, which was pretty cool. He was there for the opening of our big gallery down in Parnell. He always thought, whenever I was working on these projects, he'd go, no, that's just stupid job. That's just stupid. How are you going to make that pay? That's never going to work. Fortunately, I ignored it most of the time. He said, well, how do you know it's going to work? I said, I don't. His business acumen was very much focused around the next deal. where as Gower Langsford Gallery, you know, we celebrate our 40th anniversary next year. We were sort of looking slightly at the longer picture. So yeah, I mean, in the last couple of years, of course, I wasn't making those phone calls or getting them from Marshall. I did get a phone call telling me that I had to be here today, and I had to talk about him, our friendship, and you know, just how much I'm going to miss him. And we had a lovely last dinner up at Auckland, and with Annalise and Leah on their way to Hamilton to take Marshall to get his award. And it was such a, it's where the phone's ringing, it's probably him. It was such a night, and you know, that night, you know, Marshall's dementia wasn't really that obvious. He was animated, he was in conversation, he was absolutely alight. And so, you know, to finish, when I got Leah's phone call, I was pretty surprised how fast Marshall had gone downhill. Annalise and Nina had done an amazing job of looking after him, which is not an easy thing to do. And he was lucky, very lucky, you know, to have you there helping. And, you know, I know, Leah, you were up in the Gibbston Valley, but you were there in spirit. So, he loved his ceramics, and that's where he's ended up. Isn't that a marvellous thing? He's right here behind us. Here's Marshall.
Thank you so much, John, for sharing with us. And now let's hear from an artist's perspective. I'd like to welcome to the podium Mr. Wayne Seifert. Thank you, Wayne.
Wayne. Love his Annalise and Leah, Nina and their families. And yeah, I had to write down my memories of Marshall. They go back a long time.
Wait, microphone.
Okay, good. Microphone is important. So, it's working?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, walking up the spiral staircase to the Marshall Seifert Gallery on Dowling Street, it always made me feel like I was walking into a world of art, you know, because you're climbing something, there's a feeling of aspiration to get there. And so that was a fantastic thing about first seeing Marshall's gallery. And he was the first dealer to give me an exhibition. That was back in 1984. And Marshall gave me the best piece of advice that I've ever gotten from anybody concerning art. And that was just simply not to let the air out of the bag, he said. That meant it's got to be great, it's got to be concise and full. And he was really well schooled in art, you know, growing up in New York. He went to all the great art galleries there. And he told me, you know, you go to the Metropolitan Museum and there's so many rooms there, you never get to the end of art there. And it's quite true, because I've been there a couple of times, and it's so much, and then there was a Diane Arbus show next door, but by the time I was finished looking at, I think it was a Pissarro from 1865, and it was all brushy and grey. I was stuck there, so I didn't even get to see everything there, and Arbus was a favourite. Yeah, so you just can't ever, it's impossible to get to the end of art. It really is, and Marshall had a deep, knowledgeable love of art. Well, that first exhibition that I had, it proved to be a real event. Because, you know, you have an opening, and just everybody seemed to be interested just in talking to each other. You know, it's a social occasion. And they didn't seem so much interested in my paintings. I thought, you know, I've got some great things to show you here, folks. So what I did, I started smashing the paintings with my fist, just one after the other. And wow, and Marshall just hugged me and stopped me. And that was that. That was the end of that Friday night. So, gosh. So there was the Francis Hodgkins fellow of the time, Michael Armstrong. And I lived out at Ravensbourne. So he had a van and he helped cart, I only ran in transport. He carted them back to Ravensbourne for me. And I worked like crazy the whole weekend. And so we reinstalled the show on the Monday, and it was a better show. So you could take these knocks. So, you know, obviously I must have exasperated Marshall a great deal over the years, because we had long running, lots of shows from '84 through to 2000 and something, early 2000. And he was tireless in his promotion of my work. You know, he'd put paintings in the back of his car, he'd take them, who knows where, he might take them up to Christchurch or something, and then he'd sell them, and yay, I'd have more money for paint and carry on. So he's a fantastic guy. And also a memorable thing was every Friday afternoon in his gallery, there'd be a loose group of us would get together, you know, just for a chat. You know, I remember Christopher Moore was there, Jeffrey Harris, a number of other people, just casual talk, and we'd have a nip of whiskey, which was nice. And but Marshall might bring out tales, you know, of his early days, because, you know, he had so many, like an onion, as you say, John, because he was a gag writer for Soupy Sales, so who would have guessed, you know? And Soupy was a big hero of mine, so I love that show. Whose Line Is It Anyway? Some of you know it. It was great anyway. And Marshall, he was just so kind. That's so kind, because when Alison was due to give birth, we were living out at Karatani. I called up Marshall, and he came and drove us in to Needham to the maternity hospital, and then after Stella was born, he drove us back. So, lovely guy. And so, you know, I'll always remember him with deep gratitude and love. So cheers, everyone.
I know what Marshall said about you, Wayne. He said your art is good. I'd like to invite up now the wonderful Graham Sidney to talk about his memories of Marshall. Thank you, Graham.
I know Marshall would have been very amused at my discomfort having to follow Jesus. All these other speakers have painted a memorable and colourful picture of what a remarkable personality we're remembering today. And like the others, all of us here, I imagine, I feel the privilege of having enjoyed him as a friend for several decades. He and Annalise, I remember at Ros and my wedding in 1978.
And that night, you and Marshall went off to watch the rugby game.
On my wedding night, I went to watch the rugby game. Not much more I can say about that. I knew him back then as this confident, talkative, and sporty American born in Australia, who got engaged to a gorgeous and clever blonde Danish woman less than a week after meeting her, even though he swore to me that they didn't speak each other's language. That he had very wealthy and aristocratic relatives in the USA, that he lived now in a little wooden villa on the flat at Waitati, that he'd worked at the Waldorf Astoria, but now was with some anti-alcohol operation, that he had starred in Bruce Morrison's film The Wreck of the General Grant. So he's a film star as well, in his own mind. Whose life story seemed to be so full of incredible yarns and experiences, you never knew whether he was bullshitting or not. Which of the sensational or curious stories he constantly trotted out could be true, and which was simply a mad, arrogant yank trying to impress, or more likely amuse himself and entertain us. Like the one where he was adamant that one night, staying in the front bedroom of the Vulcan Hotel in St. Athens, which I see in a picture on the wall here, the hotel famed for its ghost, he got up in the middle of the night to go to what passed for a bathroom in the old pub. He locked the loo door behind him and woke up some time later on the floor with a big lump on the back of his head. He was adamant that there was no other explanation for it than that the mythical ghost had whacked him. And when he staggered back to bed and a sleepy Annalise asked where he had been gone so long, he said, "Feel that," meaning the lump, pointing to the swelling lump on his head. No, he wasn't boozed. He was working for an anti-alcohol thing. It was the damn ghost. No question in his mind. Did he make that one up? Might have done. Might not. There were always stories. And he had the stutter, which never seemed to embarrass him or stem the flow. Jimmy Durante, a name some of you might know, once said something I thought summed up Marshall very nicely. Durante said, "My wife has a slight impediment in her speech. Every now and again, she stops to breathe." Then when it came time, his time as an art dealer, it was always the stories which fueled his judgment. The background stories of the artist's life or personality or behaviour, the quirky things, the odd things, the astonishing and unexpected things, the stories that he thought the painting or image might mean. These contextual anecdotes powered his enthusiasm and often led to stubborn disagreements between him and me about the merits of an artist or his work. For example, he was convinced that Wayne must be a true artist because Marshall spotted him one day standing in a raincoat thigh deep in the water at Sawyer's Bay, the tide slowly rising, and Wayne still standing there all alone out in the bay. That was enough for Marshall. Only a real artist could do such a thing, or even think of it. But had it really happened? I never knew for sure, but I did know that Marshall became one of Wayne's chief supporters and advocates. We agreed sometimes, but not regularly. He was a determined and generous man and supported creative workers and young artists he deemed to be promising. And typically for Marshall, he listened to no one, especially not me. His own instinct for what was good was all that mattered. And what was good mostly depended on what stories he could weave around the work. Not only young emerging artists though. As mentioned before, old Ivan Hill, one of our own outsider artists, living in Mosgiel, I think, was one of Marshall's favourites, with his curious naive and narrative paintings starring people like Richard Hadley, James K. Baxter, and a lovely young Dunedin roller skater called Joanne Gamble. Characters like Ivan delighted him. Incidentally, I was delighted to hear today that as a teenager he had a pet rat called Ralph. That must have added something to his devotion to Ralph Hotary. Another source of many a good story, of course. In the middle of the 1990s, Marshall and I travelled as so-called ambassadors together to Dunedin's sister city, Otaru, in Hokkaido in northern Japan. It was fascinating for me to see that amongst the Japanese, Marshall was a different man to the one I knew in Dunedin. Everything about Japanese society and culture seemed to thrill him. In Otaru, he was deferential, quiet, respectful, and dare I say it, even humble. Something in the long, ritualistic history of Japanese society really called to his deeper nature. He was unusually happy there. Nothing disappointed him. Everything pleased him. He was especially pleased when one day, at a very formal official lunch, I was enticed to try sea urchin, whose horribly powerful laxative properties were unknown to me, but not to him. Soon after the lunch, on a walk along Otaru's waterfront canal with the official party, I was suddenly and urgently caught short, and dashing to a public loo just in time, I was mortified to discover that the custom in Japan is for you to discreetly carry your own toilet paper wherever you go. Public conveniences there don't provide any. So there I was, relieved to have avoided an appalling public embarrassment and having made the cubicle on time. But sitting on my lonely throne, wondering what the hell to do, knowing there was a team of smiling, suited Japanese bureaucrats standing patiently outside, I'm thinking that since I didn't even have a handkerchief, perhaps my tie might be right. Or if I used my scarf, or even took off my socks, would anyone notice? I won't tell you the solution on the day. I can tell you I've never seen Marshall laugh so much. There were literally tears in his eyes, and they weren't from grief. It all becomes a story, I suppose. One last thing to mention, just to round out the character from my point of view. As we've heard, he was a demon gambler. He'd bet on anything and everything, a passion he shared with his dear mate Roy Colbert. Basketball, golf, rugby, any game, anything you could bet on, he did. He had an account with a betting agency, was it in Central Australia or in Alice Springs, Centrebet? And when he retired from the gallery, I suspect a lot of his time was spent whispering on the phone to Centrebet. Mandy mentioned that he was responsible for Waitati's proud branding, "Why not Waitati?" I never understood the need for such ridiculous and meaningless labels. Why not Waitati is up there for me with Ashburton's "Whatever It Takes." Or the best of all, Milton's boastful sign as you approach from the north. "Milton, visit our motor camp." Then as you leave the town, on the south side, another sign. "Did you visit our motor camp?" Absurd things. It's not Marshall's most admirable legacy, but many other things are. He was so influential to many people across a wide range of activities, as you've heard, and it was a privilege to call him friend. All these things I've mentioned were part of the man I knew and enjoyed. I knew too that he considered himself hugely fortunate, living a rich and consequential life he did, with a wife he loved so much for so long, a family he was devoted to, all three making him so very proud, a house and property at Doctor's Point he truly thought was paradise. Such an interesting life. Wonderful lives leave wonderful stories and lasting, comforting memories. How much of it was made up? I think we all know that in Marshall's case, it might have all been true.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sydney. That was actually hilarious. Think about a career in comedy. I won't take offence about that Waitati comment. It's Waitati, why not? We have some more tributes to be read out, and I'm going to ask Simon to come up first and read a tribute from Dutchie. We've got a couple more tributes and then some more entertainment for you all. Thank you, Simon.
I'd like to share a tribute from John Rademacher, otherwise known as Dutchie. Long-time All Black and Canterbury Ram. Sorry, Tall Black, not All Black. Possibly could be. Tall Black, Canterbury Ram, and general New Zealand basketball legend. Kua hangaia itahi tōtara. A tōtara has fallen. Tēnā koutou katoa. I extend my sincere condolences to Annalise, Nina, Leah, and Te Whānui katoa. He poiri nui tēnei wā. Although the tōtara has fallen, we also share our deep gratitude to honour the life of a man who has shaped so many of us, a coach, a mentor, a storyteller, and a steady presence in the lives of countless young people who were fortunate enough to cross his path. My own journey with Marshall began more than 50 years ago at an under-20 national basketball tournament. I was a skinny Dutch Māori teenager. I know a non-skinny Dutch Māori. I don't know, he's gone. Any other Dutch Māori I know is not skinny. When Marshall spotted me from afar, he walked straight up, looked me over and said, "Son, you need to eat more if you want to progress in basketball." That was classic Marshall, honest, direct, but always encouraging. It marked the beginning of a relationship that would influence the course of my life. Years later, we would meet again at Newton Stadium when I trialled for his New Zealand under-20 side. My father was a hard-working Dutchman, but limited in how he could guide me through those early adult years. I was a young, naive university student who needed an adult male with confidence, sophistication, and a sense of direction. Marshall became that person. He had a gift for knowing when to pull you aside. I remember him telling me something was missing in my game, and he launched into an oyster analogy, explaining how a pearl is formed only when sand gets in and acts as an abrasive. But in hindsight, he was trying to force a square peg into a round hole. I had my mother's temperament, calm on the surface, paddling like mad underneath. The oyster analogy was never going to happen. What mattered was the intention behind it. Marshall wanted me to grow, to stretch, to find that extra gear. His belief in me never wavered. He saw potential long before I recognised it myself, and that belief, that steady, quiet confidence stayed with me throughout my playing career and well beyond it. Marshall's influence went far beyond basketball. Long before sports psychology became fashionable, he was talking about the power of the mind, how to gain a psychological edge. He would spray these advice gems like confetti, far too advanced for this boy at this time. But as I matured as a Canterbury Ram and later in business, I realised how far ahead of his time he truly was. Those lessons stayed with me. They helped me build a successful business career, even in my quest to become a competitive golfer. Today, I'm able to mentor young Canterbury golfers. His influence continues to ripple outwards, touching people he never even met. So, to Annalise, to the family, and to everyone who loved him, thank you for sharing Marshall with us. His impact on our lives is immeasurable, and his memory will continue to guide us long after today. Marshall, thank you for shaping not just my game, but my life. E te rangatia. Takoto, 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 e hoa. Rest in peace, my friend. E te whānau, to the family, kia kaha, kia manawa nui, be strong, be stout-hearted. Haere tonu, haere tonu, haere tonu. Move forward. Ngā mihi kia koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Next, we have a tribute from the previous gallery owner of Blueskin Gallery, Louise Burnside. Someone's going to read that out?
That's our sister-in-law, Nikki Wilson.
Thank you, Nikki.
Hi, I'm Simon and Leah's sister-in-law, and I'm really happy to read this tribute from Louise Burgess. It was with such sadness that I learned of Marshall's death, although I was fully aware of his battle with Alzheimer's. Now that I want to write a tribute, it's only with love and joy which comes back to me for all of the amazing times we had together. As far as I was concerned, before I got to know Marshall, he was an iconic Dunedin art dealer. That's all in caps. I moved to Waitati in 2006, and our first encounter was on a beach at Doctor's Point. He had a dog which kept getting away. He was often chasing or looking for it, always with such energy. It was in 2010 that I decided to open gallery on Blueskin, and I had kept my plans quiet. I had the builders in, I had the windows covered up with paper so passers-by couldn't see in. I think the sign said, "Gallery on Blueskin, opening soon." One afternoon I heard a tapping on the window, and when I went to the door, Marshall was standing there. He said, "Oh, it's you." We'd always laughed about how he hated not knowing what was going on. Whenever there was an exhibition on, Marshall would take a look. He'd walk down to the shop, then pop in for a coffee. We'd talk about many things, and his knowledge and encouragement were amazing. He was a real mentor for me, but his way was always light-hearted and full of fun. He obviously told me thousands of stories from his many years in the art world, which were priceless. At the start of 2017, Marshall came to me with a proposal for an exhibition that he wanted to hold. It was going to be the 50th anniversary of Jeffrey Harris having exhibited in Dunedin, and Marshall felt that it needed to be celebrated. He had personally collected 22 early works, so a show was easily put together. Other galleries have expressed their gratitude for his kindness in sharing his collection with them, and I am no different. After the May 2017 exhibition of early Jeffrey Harris, he would bring me in interesting and exceptional pieces to hang on a regular basis. Not only was he helping me regularly, but he still visited Brett weekly and was on the lookout for pieces for Leah's space in Central Otago. He was a whirlwind of activity, and he was always excited about what we were all doing. In addition to paintings and drawings, Marshall loved pottery, and especially Japanese tea bowls. In 2019, we held the first Tea Bowl Awards and exhibition, which was a competition dreamed up by Marshall and entered by ceramicists from all over New Zealand. The response was phenomenal, and so we ran it again in 2020. In addition to the competition was Marshall's own collection, including Hamada, Leech, Brickle, Castle, Sneezik, Takeshi, and the Martins. Many people travelled to Blueskin or submitted work for these shows, as it had really sparked an interest which had been lacking in the past few years. Sadly, what we had planned to be an annual event was not realised, because in April 2020 we were all hit by the pandemic, and isolation became a necessary way of life. Marshall was quite shaken by what was happening in the world. He wrote an open letter with which he wanted to share on social media. His idea was based on an Italian theme where villagers threw open their windows and sang to their neighbours to help them feel less afraid. Marshall says in the letter, there are two things that are shared by all of mankind, but are personal to only you. The first is your fingerprints, and the second is the story of your life. Marshall wanted to encourage elderly people to phone their children and grandchildren and tell their stories while they still had a chance. During our lockdown, he would ring me regularly to regale me with stories from his childhood. Of course, they were brilliant. It was 2021, mainly because of COVID, I decided to sell a gallery on Blueskin. It had been an awesome experience, made so much better by having Marshall watch over me. The words that came to mind when describing Marshall: brilliant, unique, totally authentic. It is such a privilege to have had him in the Waititi chapter of my life. He will be in my heart forever. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Nikki, that was amazing. And it was actually that open letter that Marshall wrote, and it was published in the Blueskin News. And I went, I bet he hasn't told these stories himself. And I phoned Marshall in 2020, and we did a 45-minute phone interview, the one and only time that I've recorded a phone interview, and I was able to share that with the family recently, and a lot of the material that I've used today came from his own words. Are you ready for a little more entertainment? I'm going to invite Philippa Harris up from the DSO to say a few words before we enjoy some music. Thank you, Philippa.
When you said entertainment, I thought, yeah, just extend to the Seifert family our condolences. I had the privilege of knowing Marshall when he was on the DSO board. He joined the board in 2001. I was aware of who he was. He was such an identity around town. But at that point, I didn't really know him. So it was in 2001 when Michael Stedman, who was also on the board, said that he'd invited Marshall to become a board member. And what did I think? Well, it was a bit late to ask me by then. And it's fair to say that if we'd adopted the usual process of assessing a potential board member according to their strategic strengths, like accounting or law, Marshall didn't quite tick the boxes. However, in 2001, he became a DSO board member. It's difficult to say with absolute precision when he was and wasn't a board member. He's listed from 2001 to 2007, and then from 2009 to 2018, he was either co-opted or in attendance. I think, like a lot of things, Marshall didn't like being fussed with rules and regulations. He couldn't see the point of some of them. For example, official board membership meant you had to attend all the board meetings, and you were supposed to read all the papers in advance. Not quite the Marshall thing. We were, of course, delighted when he did attend the meetings, as they were guaranteed to be lively, but we did miss him when he didn't. Over the course of those years, it's fair to say that the orchestra did some of their most extraordinary and most rewarding projects, thanks to Marshall. Every now and again, he'd ring, and as somebody said, he'd say, "It's me." You know who it was. And he'd say he wanted to discuss a new idea he had, and it needed to be over a nice lunch with Chardonnay, and so it would be here at the club. And so we would meet, and he would outline his latest project. I would usually worry how on earth we were going to afford it and how the logistics were going to work. But Marshall dismissed those concerns, alleging the projects would sweep everyone off their feet. And it's fair to say he was right. In all the projects I'm going to describe, Marshall already knew who the artists would be. He had it all mapped out, and what celebrities we worked with. So in 2004, DSO presented Amazing Timeless Land. This was based on the Timeless Land book, and our concert was really a live version of that book. Owen Marshall read his stories, Brian Turner read his poems, and on the overhead screen we showed some of Grant Sidney's paintings. Thank you, Grant. But for the orchestra, of course, there was the addition of live music, which had been composed by Anthony Ritchie, who's also here today somewhere. It was really the most compelling fusion of the art forms, and as a consequence, it celebrated our local artists too. Next up, in 2005, Marshall's connections with Japan came to the fore, particularly his connections with a Dunedin sister city, Otaru. There must have been a delegation coming from Otaru to Dunedin for some sort of celebration, and one of the party from Otaru was pianist Kazuko Nakagawa. And before we knew what had happened, DSO was putting on a recital with Kazuko Nakagawa, thanks to Marshall. It featured some DSO musicians too, and what a fabulous pianist she was. It gave us the chance to put on a concert of chamber music. 5 years after the Timeless Land project was yet another gem. This time, it was the portrait of F.H., which was about the life and the career of Francis Hodgkins. This time there was a script written by Catherine Chidgey, who was just becoming famous then, and it was enacted by Rima Tiriata. The work was divided into 3 main sections, and within each was the first section of Catherine's script, enacted by Rima, and then followed the music by Anthony Ritchie. In this way, the music was acting as a sort of commentary on what had been outlined in the script. The performance was prefaced by an introduction given by art curator and Francis Hodgkins specialist Jodie Dalgleish. She gave an overview of Francis Hodgkins' life and works, with a selection of those works shown on the overhead screen, so that the audience had a sense of what was coming up and could put everything in context. Marshall's plan for the structure of the work to be performed was ingenious. There were 4 sections: overture, which was something about her character through the music, and then 3 roughly chronological phases of Francis Hodgkins' painting styles, which formed these sections of the work. And these styles and the events of each phase were then mirrored in the music. So the first section was watercolors, the second section was oils, and the third section was gouaches. I've got to say I had no idea what gouache was, but I'm now hugely informed. The project was such a success, it toured to Wanaka in 2014 to be part of Festival of Colour. More recently, Marshall gifted to the DSO an artwork. It's 6 large fabric panels, and they are proudly displayed in the green room in Hanover Hall, which is the home of the DSO. As with the other projects Marshall instigated, and using as fabric as a metaphor, this tied together some connections that formed important threads of the orchestra's past, because the artist was Megan Griffiths, and she's the daughter of the historian and DSO fan, George Griffiths. And it was George Griffiths who'd commissioned the composition of From the Southern Marches, which is a classic work for orchestra and singers. So having the panels has neatly tied all those threads together. In all these projects, Marshall was able to bring some of the very best talents from across a wide range of artistic genres, and in the process of this connection, created something unique. And on top of this, the projects brought these outstanding local artistic talent to the attention of the many who were in our audiences. To misquote someone who's here today, former Tall Black John Saker from this morning's ODT, when he was commenting on Marshall's involvement in basketball. For me, Marshall saw orchestral music and art the way he saw basketball, as a beautiful thing, created by people to challenge people, something which could transport all involved somewhere else for a time. It made life bigger and richer. It deserved love and respect. He loved his people. I know I felt the warmth of this big-hearted man who has always known what is important in life. Shortly, we've got a musical tribute by 4 of the DSO musicians. These are all long-standing members of the orchestra and will have been involved appropriately in many, if not all, of the projects that I've outlined today. We are all miss Marshall, but we're all the richer for having known him. Thank you.
Now we're honoured to play for Marshall and Annalise and family 3 very different pieces. The first, Bach's Air on a G string, followed by Marconi's Gabriel's Oboe. And then I rather wish we'd already known that Nina Simone was Marshall's favourite, but we'll end on a more playful tune by Bart Howard. I'm sure you'll recognise it. Oh, sorry, I didn't introduce everyone. This is Nick Cornish, Sally Cooper, Alan Starrett, and I'm Anna Peterson.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely incredible. It's amazing the sound that comes out of just 4 instruments, and what a huge talent. Can you please put your hands together once more? Thank you everyone for your support today to farewell Marshall. He had a good and varied life, and the short time we have here today, we've barely scratched the surface. But I'd like to suggest some further reading. I'll take a moment now to promote Martial Law, Volume 1. We have several copies available for purchase here today. We've got the bank details. You too can take one of these home. Today's Dunedin ODT also has a fabulous feature story. If you want to peruse YouTube, you will find the wreck of the General Grant and perhaps some of Marshall as he starred in Antiques for Love or for Money. Talk to me after the show. Celebration. Ngā mihi nui everybody for all of your aroha that the whānau has supported and received over the last month. All your support and well wishes for reaching out to Annalise and the girls. And for being here, making the journey today to farewell Marshall. And to everybody who's watching who couldn't be with us. Today's a day for memories. A special day to say farewell to a wonderful man, a friend, a husband, a dad, a man we were very privileged to have known. Marshall was a unique and interesting person, a great talker and a real character. He had a wonderful sense of humour. He was generous, warm and intelligent. He was a connoisseur of fine things, all of you, of cigars, of brandy, of conversation, described as an enabler and a life enhancer. He gave so much to so many people. A community advocate, an identity, a coach, a mentor, and a storyteller. A wearer of hats, a lover of sports, music, and art. He was well loved, and he will never be forgotten. Those of you who are able, I'll ask you now to be upstanding. We have one final celebrity send-off moment. It's the Sailing Away video. The song words are in your sheets, and I want you to muster as much enthusiasm and gusto for life that Marshall would expect from all of you. Moi mai rā, te rangatira. Thank you, Marshall, for all that you gave and all that you were.
Just one thing about this video. Some of you might know, some might not. The reason, well, one of the reasons we chose this video is if you keep an eye on it, you will see Marshall in it. 9 months at number 1 on the New Zealand charts in 1986.
Here we come and we are sailing. Here we come, we're on our way. With the boat just from New Zealand.
I sing with gusto.
Together on our way. One people on the water. One people on the land. This New Zealand all together, Kiwis working hand in hand, sailing away, sailing away. New Zealand can do it, take it away. And our pride is in New Zealand, and our pride is in the race. We're together as one people in the challenge that we face. Sailing away, sailing away. New Zealand can do
Marshall wants you all to know that was his idea. He came up with that idea. That was a number one. Thank you, Marshall. Love and light to all of you. Thank you everyone for your support today. Please take care of each other. Aroha nui.